Okay, so now that I'm back from Sydney and I've had some opportunity to recover, there's just a few things that I'd like to touch on. So I went all the way to Sydney to see a specialist to have a feeding tube changed because my feeding tube was dislodged and it was not working properly. So anyway, they did the feeding tube change, and while I was in hospital, they were doing some other things, or trying to organise to do some other things which never eventuated, because they didn't realise they couldn't get a cannula in and forgot to order the difficult access team to come and put the cannula in. So then that meant that they couldn't go ahead with the procedure because they had no way to anaesthetise me. And so that meant that the procedure was unable to go ahead. During that time, I noticed that the feeding tube became dislodged again from the positioning that it was supposed to be in. So it meant that, I can't use it properly because it's not down in my bowel where it should be. And so I drew that to the nurse's attention, and it seems that that message didn't get across to the doctors for whatever reason, despite the fact that I did raise it with a doctor that came to see me. I said my feeding tube is not positioned correctly in the bowel where it needs to be anymore. It's migrated up into the stomach again, and I wanted them to do something about it, like check it, and if it was migrated like it is, I wanted to have a replacement feeding tube. But instead of having a replacement feeding tube, I was sent home. So, I'm a bit sort of upset because the reasons I went to Sydney were to get a replacement tube, because we can't get a replacement tube anywhere locally because no one replaces J tubes locally where I am. So, the whole reason to go to Sydney and spend all that money and do all that in terms of time and all of that was literally to get an MRI, which never eventuated because they couldn't anaesthetise me, because no one ordered the difficult access team, because they couldn't get a cannula in, and all that. And then on top of that, the feeding tube, it was in the right place, but then for whatever reason, I'm not entirely sure why, it migrated back into the stomach again. And then they decided to discharge me instead of replacing it. So I've literally come home in the same state that I left. I have no information about how damaged my spine is from the FOP. I have no information on that because the MRI didn't happen. And I went away with a feeding tube that wasn't working, only to come back and have the same issue at home because it migrated while I was even in the hospital, which I don't know why it did that. However, it did. And so for the last couple of days, I've been struggling to get liquids and food into myself since I've been come back, but it's been particularly difficult these last couple of days. And so I know that I'm going to be forced into a situation to where they're going to have to put cannulas in me, which is going to be difficult and dangerous in the community because we don't have a difficult access team here. So, for example, one time when they tried to put a cannula in before, it took 21 sticks before they got the cannula in, and it stayed in for 15 minutes. And so I know I now face that, but I also face a hospital that cannot change my tube and can't even help me in the local area, and that's why I go to Sydney. And I don't know what to say because when I've raised concerns, no one has listened to me at all in Sydney in terms of my concerns about the lack of an MRI to see how bad my spine is, despite the fact I've lost the feeling in one leg entirely and part of the feeling in the other leg. And that concerns me because I worry about how damaged the spine now is. But none of this seems to get through to anyone in Sydney to try and do anything about it. And so I just get left and no one helps me. It's so distressing and disheartening that when you come from a small community where you don't have these services and you make the effort to come and you travel a long way, you're in a very bad state, you don't have a lot of money because you are a disability pensioner, which I am sick of explaining to the hospital that Well, I can't just come to Sydney every 5 minutes. I don't have the money. I am a disability pensioner. We need to keep that in mind when we do treatments or make decisions, that I can't just return to Sydney every 5 minutes. Okay? And you need to listen to me about that sort of thing. And yes, I have tried contacting their patient experience team. Never received a response from them.